Yes, I am in Philadelphia. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hello. Hello. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Oh,
I had
Sharon, I
to
didn't
do it.
know.
I had to do it. I'm not
Yeah.
singing. I'm not singing. That's the only thing
Please,
that I'll give
please.
you.
No, it's Tom's day.
Okay.
Just wanted to tell you that Diane sends her regards and regrets. Unfortunately, she can't make it at the last minute, but
Oh,
she says hello.
okay. I know she does. She's been very, very, very supportive. So I know. We're waiting for just a couple more people.
Okay. Yeah.
Where are
Yes.
you?
Well, I'm normally in Hawaii,
Mhm.
but today I'm in Philadelphia, the suburbs of Philadelphia, where I grew up in my parents' house.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
I
Well,
got
that's nice. Nice for
it.
everybody.
Yeah. We probably overstay our welcome, but we try to.
Never.
Really? We try to
You
get
never
here
can.
every
Mm-mm.
summer. I don't know. I have my kids with me, 2 of my 3 kids.
Oh,
Definitely not overstaying then.
Maybe. I think that would be my mom's perspective. I'm not sure my
Mhm.
dad would have the same one. I think he's good with about a week. Charles Johnson, how do you do? Chuck,
You.
good to see you.
You too.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I wanted to tell you I was in Vancouver I was on what's that little Granville Island?
Granville Island, yeah.
And there's a great little bookstore in there, highly curated. And in there was your book of comics that just came out.
Really?
Yeah, I was happy to see it there. Yeah.
I'm happy to see it there too.
Yep. I even took a picture for you. I was going to send it, but got lazy.
That's all right.
Wow. We went to Granville Island last year. I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last year. Losing track of time with COVID and all this.
Yeah.
But maybe we should wait just a couple of more seconds because I think there might be a few more people on my list.
Yeah.
Some who, well, they can show up, right, Stacy? You're recording now. Okay.
We're recording now. They can show up anytime.
Okay, that's fine. Well, let's get started because there's a lot to talk about with your story. Great. And I'm going to let you talk because you know the way I am with science fiction. Okay. Okay, Tom Gammarino is the author of the novels King of the Worlds and Big in Japan and the novella Jellyfish Dreams. His short stories and essays have appeared in many journals and periodicals. He is the co-editor of Snaring New Suns. Here.
Nice.
Speculative Works from Hawaii and Beyond. He holds an MFA in creative writing and a PhD in English, and he received a Fulbright Fellowship in creative writing and the Elliott Cades Award for Literature, which happens to be Hawaii's highest literary honor. In 2021, 2 of his short stories were nominated for the Pushcart Prize. As you can tell, he's originally from Philadelphia and now lives on Oahu, where he teaches creative writing, science fiction, magical realism, and jazz lit to what he calls some highly awesome high school students. And actually they should be because they go to the high school that Obama went to. So that's where he teaches. Tom,
yeah.
would you like to talk about your story?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about my story. Thank you for having me. This is really quite an honor. I do want to offer a disclaimer. I'm horribly jet lagged. My mind is a little foggy, but I'll do my best. Yeah, not only is Punahou School Obama's school, we actually we were living in faculty housing some years ago, and every day a tour bus would drive by. And I didn't know why. For 6 months, I didn't know why. And finally, I stopped them and said, what's so interesting about our place? And they said, Obama grew up in your place. And I said, which unit? And they said, yours. So my kids actually grew up in the same room as Barack Obama, wow. Which is really cool for my daughter who wants to be a diplomat. So maybe president, who knows? Yeah, so this story, Futures Studies. I just reread it today. It actually is old for me. I think I wrote this story around 2015. And the truth is, it was not a short story at the time. It was the first chapter of a novel that I eventually finished. I finished this novel around 2016, and I guess I thought it was pretty good. And then I a very long story, but I ended up getting a new agent with it, and then just scads of rejection letters, the highly demoralizing time in my life. And finally, some of you are writers, I'm sure, and you've had the experience of being rejected. And sometimes there is a little voice in you that says, yeah, maybe you were trying to fudge it. Like, they're right. They're right to reject this one. Other times, no. Other times you're absolutely defiant. You believe in this thing and it's the best you could possibly do. And I guess in this case, I didn't feel that way. I thought, yeah, the novel's okay. But I always felt pretty married to this first section. To me, reading it today, I thought, oh, wow, it's, many times it's kind of an occupational hazard if you write science fiction tinged work, that some of it is going to feel passé pretty quickly. And it's going to feel obsolete, or retrofuturist is the nice way to put it. But this story didn't feel that way to me. Reading it this morning, I thought, actually, this story is pretty timely here in 2023 when we're having our AI moment, right? Like Val's looking. Has everyone read the story? Okay, mostly. So the main character Val here is he's a transhumanist. I think some shaking heads. Not everyone has read the story, so I'll give you a little background. Val is let's see, he was born deaf. He has cochlear implants. I can tell you this is taken right from my own life. I have 2 children with cochlear implants, born profoundly deaf. And really, when my children had that surgery at 1.5 years of age, I was always interested in science fiction, but suddenly I was feeling a whole lot more breathless about it, about science, that is. I mean, it was kind of miraculous, right? What this doctor did to my kids, just piped a new sense into him. What a thing, right? So that was truly, gee whiz. It changed me fundamentally in some ways, and it changed my literary tastes in some ways. I really became much more interested in science fiction around that time. That would have been 2007. And so anyway, Val in this story has cochlear implants and some very condescending parents. They're kind of high achievers, sort of New England Brahmin types, and they've gone to Yale and whatnot. And they've made him feel inferior somehow for having come out defective, right? For having been born less than in some way. And he's born in Hawaii, but he's taken out of Hawaii when he's 5 years old, grows up on the Upper East Side of New York City, and has a hard time of things. Is sort of picked on, put down by his own parents. And so he creates a mythology for himself, or he discovers a kind of mythology around technology. This is a real thing. Some of you will know of it. Some of you may not. It's called transhumanism. Transhumanism is the idea that that through technology and other means, but mainly technology. By other means, I really mean other technologies like pharmaceutical technologies. We are going to leave behind the negative aspects of our human inheritance. So things like, all our evolutionary programming that kind of works against us in some way, right? Maybe death, maybe even death is something we can leave behind. A lot of transhumanists are interested in longevity studies, and they want us to be literally immortal. Maybe in bodies like this, where the parts get swapped out. More likely, though, as kind of, it's a core tenet of transhumanism that intelligence is substrate independent. That is to say, there's nothing privileged, there's nothing special about carbon, right? We're just so much information being processed in a certain way. And if we could copy that information onto some other substrate, silicon or whatever, that would be just as good and in fact better, because it wouldn't need to die the way the way we do. The kind of I'm talking real life now. We're outside of my story. Have you heard of Ray Kurzweil? He's kind of the guru, the head priest of what is sometimes called singularitarianism. He's been preaching about this thing called the singularity, and preaching feels like the right word, for I guess about 25 years now. The singularity gets defined in different ways, but Ray Kurzweil's main talking point is that we have this felt sense, intuition that things improve like this, kind of linearly, because in our experience, that's how things improve. But he says it's different with intelligence at the interface of technology. This is an exponential growth curve, and so it's more like your compound interest sort of situation where it all happens real quickly at the end. And so he says technology doesn't go like this. In fact, it goes like this, parabolically, right? And so his big question is, what does it look like at the end here when the line goes almost straight up? It can never go totally straight up because time, but basically it's going straight up. What does that look like? And Kurzweil would say things like, well, that's the moment at which we kind of leap to our next evolutionary stage. And it's no more radical than, single-celled organism to frog, is human being to this next stage. And that's the moment at which consciousness becomes downloadable. There's a documentary about Ray Kurzweil. It's called Future Man. And the sort of structure of the documentary really is about this kind of argument about whether Ray is a sort of poet, in other words, a little bit mad, or is he just a prophet? Is he right, as he's been about many things? He has a great track record. He invented the first reader for the blind. They could scan text and it would read to them. One of the most famous synthesizers is called the Kurzweil after him. So he's got this good track record. And he's been talking for a long time now about, well, the title of his book from the 90s is The Age of Spiritual Machines. And then his next book was called The Singularity is Near. And you can hear the religious language in there, right? It's the end is near kind of thing. So it does have it feels like a religion sometimes. And yet it is all grounded in data, right? And science and projections from existing data, especially something called Moore's Law, which you may or may not have heard of. Moore's Law is this idea that that the amount of information we can fit on a computer chip basically doubles every 18 months, and the cost goes down, 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 down. And that's been true since the 1950s. And so if that continues, like, yeah, we're heading for something. And as you probably know, here we are in 2023. And in fact, Charles and Sharyn, weren't we talking about this stuff just recently before ChatGPT came out, maybe around that time?
I think we were.
Yeah. So now everyone's talking about it, right? Now it's on the primetime news.
Can I ask you to relate this to the story?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So Val just believes absolutely that he's a little bit further along than his dinosaur parents, right? Because he's a cyborg. He's already part technology. And that's the way we're all going to be sooner or later if we're lucky, right? So when his dad puts him down, he can kind of retreat into this philosophy, right? That I'm the future, Dad. And so he does that. And he's such a true believer in this faith that it's unshakable. And he goes to college to study futures studies at UH. They do indeed have a good program in futures studies. What is the one thing that could really stand in the way of someone's vision? Well, if it's that, well, falling in love. So this is a story about a transhumanist who falls in love. Oh, that sucks, right? Because suddenly you've been so invested in this religion of basically world renunciation, right? Wanting to live not now, not here, but in some future you're dreaming about, and suddenly you're in love with someone in the here and now. Oh man, what a tension. And I think for me, this story really ends up being about how the future we get is kind of the one we manifest, right? It's just the one we believe in the most. I don't want to go too far with that, but you know, he is so married to his vision that he can't quite transcend it much as he wants to. And you know, it comes at a great cost. The last line of the story is he's looking at constellations, which he used to be able to see so clearly. And the last line is, amid those myriad points of light, all he can see is darkness. And that's kind of the whole story in a nutshell, right? There was all this light, all this possibility, but you know, namely love, but he just couldn't see it right. You know, he was so fixated on his vision. So that's how it ties into the story. I have plenty of other things I could talk about, but is it time for me to shut up a bit?
Maybe there are some questions from people
Great.
about it so far.
Yeah.
Well, I just going to say that, Tom, I think the story is delightful. I read it about 4 a.m. this morning. I had a lot of things to do, and I said, I got to read Tom's story before we do the Zoom tomorrow, right?
Thank you.
And I was a little tired, but from the first sentence on, I was captivated.
Great.
It's brilliant. I mean, really, the prose, on the level of prose, the originality, it's just a delight. And they're geeks, you know, both Val and Maya, like me. So I'm having a great time. You're talking about movies, you're talking about literature and ideas that I think about all the time, because as you know, science and philosophy have long been linked. So at the very beginning, you know, you talk about Plato's allegory, you know, of the cave, you know, myth of the cave and so forth. So I'm reading the story and I'm thinking, okay, what have we got here? We've got contemporary discourse about something extremely important in the sciences, with this kid who has got these implants, and it's a love story for the most part, but he's stuck. And you just explained beautifully why he's stuck, in terms of his relationship with Maya. Now, I don't know how the novel played out as a novel. This looks like a first chapter.
Yeah.
So this is appropriate for Sharyn's anthology. What's next? Because that's what I'm curious about. What's next for these two people? And also, even further, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about singularity, to refresh my mind about what this was all about. But you did. Thank you. Just a few moments ago. But why is there a conflict between love and transhumanism? Why? Why is that? Is that something lost exponentially as we advance because we're not machines?
Yeah, I think from the point of view of Val, anyway. I mean, I'm sure there are ways you could reconcile a blooming love affair with a belief in transhumanism, but I think in Val's mind, his belief is so coupled with a lonely childhood, right? And feeling like maybe the only boy who hasn't kissed a girl yet or something. It's so for him, I think he's been dismissive of love and all that stuff. It's been probably for him, I think he would probably have a very evolutionary explanation. Well, we only fall in love so that we can make babies, right? And it's all just information copying. And he's above that somehow.
Sorry, that was the phone.
That's okay.
No, continue. So
yeah.
I'm not sure actually that all of that is in the first chapter. I got the sense of his parents being rather, elitist, but I didn't really, and I have the sense of his being lonely. And I thought that was part and parcel of his just being brilliant, geeky. but there's more there. There's more suffering there.
Yeah, I think causally it's the other way. To me, it's not that he's brilliant and therefore lonely. This is that he's lonely and therefore brilliant. because he's retreated into books,
Yeah.
as many of us have.
I think Stephanie has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I do. I'm on the same wavelength, but he is also living in a world that doesn't exist in Lord of the Rings and Star Trek. And this is much more familiar to him, and he's far more comfortable in that world of the imagination than he is in the real world of his parents or of school or of anything else.
Yeah.
So that romance of the novel of the Lord of the Rings and the Star Trek, that exists for him. He has that through that, but not through interaction. And if he was a transhumanist, truly, I mean, eventually he would be completely cyborg eventually. And there are some that think that the Big Bang came out of the singularity. So waiting for the singularity is going back prior to the Big Bang, isn't it? In a sense?
I think no, in the sense, I mean, so the term singularity is borrowed from physics. You're absolutely right that normally in science, when we say singularity, we're talking about a black hole, right?
Yeah.
The part from which light cannot escape, etc. So the term is borrowed for technological singularity, but what they share in common is this idea that you can't see past it, right? So in the case of a black hole, it's the event horizon, right? We just can't see beyond that. And with the technological singularity too, the idea is we can speculate about what's on the other side, but we literally don't have the brains to be able to see that. But it's so interesting you made that connection, because actually one of the core, texts in the canon of singularitarianism is Isaac Asimov's great story, The Last Question. Do any of you know this story? It's a totally wonderful story in which, and it's cool. It's like a theme with variations kind of story. You get the same tiny little story retold with variations, maybe 4 times, and then you get to a kind of conclusion. So basically it's set in the 1950s or whatever. You have a couple of scientists, physicists, who are wringing their hands about entropy. Entropy, simply put, means that things fall apart, right? Energy in a system dissipates and it tends toward messiness, right? Things fall apart. The universe will fall apart. And it's pretty close to saying everything dies. It's not exactly that, but it's close. And so these 2 physicists are wringing their hands about this problem. Like, oh man, so our lives might be good, but someday it's all for naught, right? It's all going to go away. So they ask whatever the biggest computer at the time is. It's called the AC, and I actually forget what that stands for. I think it's analog computer. They ask it, how do we halt entropy? And it says, insufficient data for meaningful answer. And then you skip a few hundred years. And now you have a family on a spaceship, and a little girl saying, "Daddy, I'm worried about entropy. What are we going to do?" And so they asked the biggest computer at that time, and now it's called like the Galactic AC or something. And they ask it, same question, how do we halt entropy or reverse entropy? And the computer at that time says, insufficient data for meaningful answer. And now you hurtle forward some millions of years, and let's say we're disembodied consciousnesses now, just sort of floating in space, but still worried about entropy. And someone asks the big computer, whatever it's called then, how do we reverse entropy? And it says insufficient data for meaningful answer. And now you get to the kind of the last page or so of the story. And this computer has absorbed sort of all of the information in the universe, such that intelligent entities like us are kind of redundant. We're unnecessary. So we're gone. There's just this computer now. And it's actually existing for the sake of the last question now. It's the only question it hasn't answered. How do we resolve entropy? And then a few more eons pass, and it continues to compute. And finally, the computer figures it out. It knows how to reverse entropy. And now it's faced with the decision, should I do that or should I not do that? And the last line, the last paragraph echoes language from Genesis 1, right? About, brooding over the dark and whatever. And the very last line of the story is "Let there be light." And so this computer, which started out as, you know, an Apple IIe, has swollen until it's absorbed all the information and actually become God. Really, you could see this as a prequel of Genesis, or as you were saying, Stephanie, starting things up again, right?
Yeah. The one thing you just said is it okay if I talk? I
Oh,
hear.
absolutely.
Yeah. You know, he makes a conscious decision at the end
Mm.
to negate his humanism, his humanity, by rejecting being a boyfriend and rejecting the love and becoming, you know, and then at the very, very end, he's looking what? Not into the light, he's looking into the dark.
Right.
And so it's almost as if he willingly becomes a computer or a cyborg or something.
That's a great way to put it. I love that. I mean, I never thought about it that way, but that's great. I think it was William Faulkner. Somebody asked him to interpret his own story, and he's like, "That's not my job."
Yeah, exactly.
You do.
Right. No, I enjoyed it very much. I have met some transhumanists before.
Oh,
An organization called the Foundation for the Future many years ago here in Bellevue, where they would meet to discuss what humanity would be like by the year 3000, which is very interesting in this day and age with global warming, if we'll even be here by the year 3000. But anyway, the thing that he really denies his humanity. And if you, and Chuck was saying, you know, like the beginning of a chapter, you almost get the feeling that like 50 years from now, there he is brooding about this day and what he did.
well, that's exactly right. That's how I used it in the novel. So, Chuck, your questions would never really have been answered in the novel. It's really just backstory. It's like this is the wound that makes him into the darker figure he is in the rest of the book.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's different. You know, I'd love to hear you talk because I think you're very learned in all the things I care about, such as science and literature and philosophy, probably. Why science fiction? Why science fiction as the means for, because science fiction is an intellectual literature at its best, right?
It's true.
And I've been a devotee since I was a kid. So why science fiction for you?
Yeah.
I mean, you said something about, you know, your kids, you know, and that's very important. I can relate to that. But I want to hear, why science? And also, why is it such a dominant form of storytelling now? I think it is.
I agree. In the 20th century, we used to talk about the science fiction ghetto, right? Like it was.
Right.
That doesn't exist anymore. If there's a ghetto, everyone lives there, right? It is.
Yeah.
It is absolutely mainstream culture now, but really worldwide. I mean, I know that's probably a little too much of a generalization, but if you look at, like, say, the top grossing films of all time, and if we're willing to include Marvel movies, which I think we have to, how many of them are science fiction, or how many of them are speculative, I should say? Maybe all of them. I don't know. What would be the exception? Maybe Titanic.
Well, I mean, I absorb the same things, and Sharyn thinks I'm crazy. She thinks I should be looking at something else that she's looking at, like murder mysteries. But we can treat science fiction all the way back to Plato. And maybe even earlier. It is an intellectually engaging literature. Now, the problem earlier in the 20th century was it was too intellectual and weighted towards the ideas. Although the term science fiction, right, which was coined by who? You know who?
I do. Yeah. Sorry, who? Gernsback? Gernsback. That's right. Yeah.
It was to teach young people something about science around the 1920s. And so you get stories that don't have a really fully developed sense of characterization. You don't have all that. But in the 60s, you get the new way. Exactly. And people are not, but before the emphasis was on physics, and, the hard sciences, 60s, it's on the social sciences. And a friend of mine just told me about some article that might be in the New Yorker on Samuel Delany and his contribution to the field. So that's kind of where I end. I don't really know what is going on after the 60s, but it must be new sciences like those concerned with AI and technology and so forth.
Yeah.
So I'll shut up because I want to hear you say.
No, there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, the first thing I should say is that I don't love science fiction exclusively at all. And so, in fact, you just mentioned Samuel Delaney, and I've met him a few times because I regularly read here in Philly. He lives in Philly, taught at Temple University, and I used to in fact, I got invited to do it this year, but I was in Vancouver. I read so we have the Rosenbach Museum here, where they have the only handwritten manuscript of James Joyce's Ulysses. And so on June 16th, they have one of the biggest Bloomsday celebrations. For those of you who don't know, James Joyce Ulysses is a book that came out in 1922, but it's set on June 16th, 1904. And it's the only novel I know that has a holiday around it, Bloomsday. So in big cities around the world, Dublin, probably something in New York, I'm sure. In Philly,
Boston.
they block. What's that?
Boston.
Boston, right? Wherever there are Irish folks.
Right.
The irony there is that James Joyce hated Ireland. He called it the sow that eats its young. He only returned once after he left when he was 20 or something to try and open the first movie theater in Ireland. Anyway, I love Ulysses. It's one of my favorite books, and yeah, that's where I know Chip. He reads on Samuel Delaney, who goes by Chip. He reads regularly there, and the thing is, I really love Ulysses. I really love literary modernism, and it actually the thing that makes me love literary modernism actually is the thing that makes me love science fiction, at least to some degree. You know what? I have an article about this. I can send you. In fact, it's on my website. If you go to tomgammarino.com and you go to other work, you'll see an article called How Modernism and Science Fiction Have More in Common Than I Might Have Thought. I think that's what it's called. So
could you summarize why that is?
Yeah, if I can remember my argument.
No,
I'm not sure I can do my article
you
justice.
don't have to. We can read it.
But
it's fine.
It is something the chief virtue of all literature for me. All the literature that I love, right? And it's Kafka. It's lots of magical realism. It's some realism, but there's usually something experimental going on at the level of the writing. To me, it's defamiliarization. That's the thing. It's the thing that Viktor Shklovsky, a Russian formalist, talked about in 1918, I think, in 1917, in an essay called Art as Device. And he called it ostranenie. It's in Russian, it means strange making, to make strange. Right. And what he was saying was the habitualization is what in translation, it's habitualization is what destroys everything good. It destroys love of one's wife, the fear of war, and he has a whole list of stuff. In other words, we get so used to stuff that we kill it, right? I like to think of a little child, because I've had some, and when they behold the world, I mean, the greatest joy of parenting, I think, was being made young again by seeing through their eyes. And I think that's what great art does. It strips away all the concepts, all the language, and suddenly you have this unmitigated experience of reality again. And art at its best, I think, can do that. Makes us see something in a fresh way. It's Gertrude Stein. It's, many a poet.
Yeah, let me slide into that real quick, because I think this idea has been expressed elsewhere. And it's the idea what art should do is liberate perception. It should make the familiar strange and the strange familiar, because what you want to do is rekindle through the artistic aesthetic experience a sense of mystery and wonder. And that's what you get with science fiction. And I think the best modernism too.
Am I hearing a contradiction with this? Because with transhumanism, you're saying, which I don't know a lot about, you're saying that you're becoming something else. That is, the human person eventually is becoming something else. So if that's the case, what are you becoming? What happens to the self in that? In other words, how can these characters think as a self?
All right, that's a That's a
Or
great.
experience as a self.
Well, come
Yes.
on, Sharon, aren't we Buddhists? What self?
That's
Well, I
what
don't
I'm
even know what you're
getting
talking
at.
about.
That's
Are
exactly
we the
what I'm
Borg?
getting at.
Is Buddhism the Borg? In a sense?
Oh, I think I should let the Buddhist priest talk to that. Chuck, is Buddha is
No,
Buddhism the Borg?
But Sharon's question as a Tibetan Buddhist, or my question as a Zen practicing person, is about the self.
Yeah,
Will the,
where is the self in this? Because some consciousness is recognizing this.
Mhm.
So where is it? What happens to it when it becomes transhuman, whatever that
Yeah.
may be?
So what is it that gets kind of technologically transmigrated, right?
Yes.
What preserves us? And I
Okay,
have
those are the words.
I mean, I just have to think, at least in the mind of someone like Val, it's patterns of some kind. It's, in the pattern recognition sense. In other words, yes, I'm just information, but I'm information that does certain things, right? It has certain habits of mind and thought. I guess we can even include values in there.
Tom, let me just poke at that for a moment.
Mm.
You probably know something about phenomenology, which is
yeah, I know what it is.
The study of consciousness, right?
Mm.
Husserl and Heidegger and Sartre and all those French and German guys. Here's my question about transhuman. We know very little about what consciousness is, which is one of the reasons why we can't create it, but we are embodied.
Yeah.
We are in bodies. And that seems to be very important, for forming some sense of self in the limits of, self and other. So if we have a transhuman, it must be embodied in a body, right?
Sure.
But so I'm gonna let you play with that.
Well, I don't know that it has to be in a body, in which case you end up with a kind of hell scenario, right? And there's a really fascinating book. It's called The Age of M by an economist. M is E-M, by an economist named Robin Hanson, I think. That might be wrong, but the book is called The Age of M. And his argument is that, and he's arguing not as a philosopher, simply as an economist. He thinks there's about, I think he puts it at like 20%. He thinks there's like a 20% chance that we are going to do the following. We are going to figure out, long before we have any deep understanding of what consciousness is, we will understand how to copy it, right? You don't need to have a deep understanding to copy something. And so he thinks we'll be able to do that in short order. And capitalism will get its hands on that very quickly and will exploit it. So you'll take, say, the head of some industry, let's say software development, rather than hire 10,000 new employees for some big initiative, we'll just take the mind of the very best person working on this and digitally clone it, right? Maybe even without their knowing somehow. And suddenly we'll have 10,000 minds that are the best qualified in the field working on this thing, trapped inside of computers. And who cares if they have fulfilling lives? We'll make them subsistence level happy. We'll give them enough digital distractions or whatever. Maybe we'll even let them believe they have bodies, in which cases it's maybe that, I mean, that might be our case anyway, right? Maybe we're in a simulation, right? So in other words, his argument is maybe we're going to bring back slavery and it's going to be perfect this time. We're going to just be the devil. So terrifying thought, but I mean, there it is. Like, I don't know, maybe we already don't have bodies, right? It's nice to have a body. I think what we are seeing with the limitations, my perceived limitations of the large language models that are coming out, ChatGPT, so most of you have probably played with. And by the way, if you've only played with the free version, I mean, this is up to you, but if you can play with the paid version, and there are free ways to do that. Like if you download Bing's chatbot, whatever it's called, and Google's Bard. Google's Bard is different. I'm sorry. It's Bing's chatbot gives you basically free access to GPT-4. And the leap from 3.5, which is the free one, to 4 is enormous. 4 is much, much better, to the point where, like, some physicist was a total skeptic about whether these language models were exhibiting real intelligence or not. And it used as an example this one question he had put to it. He said, please stack the following 10 objects. And he just listed off a bunch of stuff, a book, a carton of eggs, whatever, a pen. And it gave this nonsensical answer, right? This is GPT 3.5, Chat GPT, the free one. The answer doesn't make any sense in terms of physics. Like, this thing clearly has no experience in the world. It clearly doesn't have the embodied knowledge of physics that a toddler has. It doesn't have that in 3.5. But he put the same question to GPT-4, and the answer, it makes you drop your jaw. It gives a perfect answer. It says you're going to want to use the book as a base, and then, you know, arrange the eggs in a 3x3 pattern, which will make a nice platform for the blah. And it all makes perfect sense physically, and it's never had a body. So it's actually quite mysterious, and it sort of made a believer of this one skeptic. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with all that. Oh, I know where I'm going. I notice what these large language models are not good at yet, from my point of view, is writing prose. It's okay with nonfiction stuff. It's very bad at like free verse poetry, and it's still very workmanlike when it comes to like writing a short story. It can write a thing with plot points, but it never feels like art. Not if you're a close reader.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that has something to do with not having a body, you know. And I have other reasons for thinking that, but that's one of them. Yeah.
Yet at this moment in time, the Screenwriters Guild is on strike. Screen Actors Guild is probably going on strike, all because of AI,
Right.
primarily. And the industry and these professionals in the industry, their life careers are very much at stake, because I have friends that have seen very good scripts come out of AI, of not Bard or whatever, of whichever one it is, and songs and cartoons and drawings, and it seems like it can learn itself without the human element to it. So it makes you wonder about creativity after a while.
I don't think these limitations are built in. I mean, I think sooner or later it's going to get there, probably across the board. And it already is. The visual art stuff is stunning. I think some of it won an art contest, right? Last fall, right? Someone submitted something to a big art contest without full disclosure, and it won.
When do we get to sentience? When does it become a sentient entity?
Well, I wonder that.
And
I wonder
what kind of sentient entity? How is it creating art for? I keep getting back to humans because I do like humans. So how does it get back? How does this art? How is it created for humans? And if it is art that we're responding to, are we responding to it based on what this new entity is telling us to respond to? Do you see what I'm getting at? In other words, are we getting our emotional content from this? Are we learning from it? Are we learning from it as humans?
I think I have two thoughts there. Did one of them just escape me? It might have.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, the first thought is, I think it's important to remember that this is not some alien invasion, right? What does this thing know? It knows us. That's all it knows, right? It knows us at our best, and it knows us at our worst. And most of the internet's probably our worst, right? But it's just the sort of average of us, right? So the stuff it's spitting back at us, you know, we kind of made it. it's a genius at pattern recognition. But I do know my other point is, I know that on principle, I'm not interested. So I kind of don't care how good a novel AI writes. I don't really want to read it. Maybe once as a curiosity. Now we have the issue of like, in the future, how are you going to know, right? Somebody can sell their novel. Maybe it's great. Maybe they claim to have written it in their garret for 12 years and they wrote it in 90 seconds. In fact, we won't know. But I'm as interested in reading those novels as I am in watching a robot break the human marathon record. It's just not impressive. Like, it's like, okay, a really cool feat of engineering. Next, right? I want to see humans do stuff despite having bodies. you know?
Because if it only gives back the average,
Mm.
then we're not really getting anything from it.
That is my second argument for why it's so far, at least, not making really good, at least fiction. And it's because, to me, any great piece of writing is weird somehow. And it's just not doing that yet. You can tell it to be weird, but then it's going to be too weird. It's just its weirdness sensitivity dial isn't tuned yet. But I don't know, 10 years out, who knows?
Would you say that, as I've heard it said, that basically you get what you program into this thing, right? I mean, it isn't capable. So again, we're talking about the imagination. Here's my question.
Yeah.
Will we have something that is self-aware?
Right. I mean, so I talk to very intelligent people on all sides of this issue. I think what's going to happen for sure, I mean, the Turing test we've long since passed the Turing test, right? I think what our moment has shown us is that the Turing test doesn't prove anything, right? I think we're going to lose sight of the question, actually. I think, functionally speaking, we will have every reason to believe these machines are self-aware. They're not going to be self-aware in the same way that we are, but we will simply have no way to test, to call them on their bluff. But your first point, though, I think is wrong, Chuck, about all they can do is what they're programmed to do. That actually, the premise for AI is that these machines, this technology will do things we cannot do, right? We're talking about creating super intelligence. And already we have, like, for instance, there is recently AI, and we're not talking about large language models anymore. AI is a vast field, and there's many types of AI. But already we've solved the protein folding problem in like a weekend, which I can't begin to explain what that is. But it's estimated that it would have taken graduate students something like 200 million years, and AI did it in a weekend, right? I think we're going to figure out, the thing is, it's so subtle, it's so good at detecting patterns, right? So AlphaGo is a great example. Go, as you may know, is a Chinese game that has more possible permutations than there are atoms in the universe. And it's beaten the best human players now. And it's because it makes moves that no human player in the thousands-year history of the game ever thought to make. They don't make any sense on their surface. But this is a super intelligent entity. It doesn't just do what it's programmed to do. It finds new patterns, it finds new ways, new solutions. Now, when you talk about art, I don't know if we're going to be open to these new solutions. We might not be the right audience.
Yeah, you've seen Colossus, the Forbidden Project, right?
What was it?
Colossus, the Forbidden Project, the movie.
No, I don't think so.
You haven't seen it? Oh, really?
No.
Check it out. Early 70s, supercomputer. I like that movie a lot. Anyway, what you're saying, in effect, is that we have a mind that is vaster than our own, faster than our own, and can solve problems in relatively an incredibly short period of time compared to us. I guess that's a good thing.
The jury's out. It's a good thing. There are two big problems that the people in this field worry about, and they really worry about them, right? Like, if you look up a guy named Eliezer Yudkowsky, he did an article in Time 2 months ago. He thinks this technology will lead to the extinction of all life on Earth. Those are the stakes, as far as he's concerned. What's that?
I think I read that. Yeah.
The two big problems, and on the other hand, you have real techno-utopians who think, no, this is the best thing that ever happened. It's going to be great. And so the two big problems are what's called the control problem and the alignment problem. The control problem is just the idea that are we going to be able to make this thing obey us? Will it eventually, have its own agenda or whatever? The other problem that I think people worry more about is called the alignment problem. That's, will this technology be aligned with our values? And so it's not that it's going to go rogue and turn against us necessarily. It's that it's just kind of, it's not going to have common sense, right? So the dumb example is like you tell AI and you give it the power, the authorization to act, and it's already connected to the internet, right? For a long time, people thought, well, we won't give it internet access, and then we'll be safe. Well, we've already passed that point. But the dumb example is like, okay, AI, please cure cancer now. And yet we forget to tell it, don't do the simplest thing, which is kill the host, right? If we had no humans, cancer wouldn't be a problem anymore. Or there's another dumb example, the paperclip maximizer. This is from the classic book in this field by Nick Bostrom called Superintelligence. It's like 300 pages just filled with, this is what could go wrong. This is what could go wrong. And one of those is, okay, you tell AI, make as many paperclips as possible. You don't tell it not to disassemble human bodies for the iron content, right? So again, these are dumb examples, but there's so many ways.
You have to see Colossus, the Forbin Project.
Okay.
Yeah, it's based on a novel. It's a very good novel.
Oh.
Because you're telling me just what that movie is all about.
Oh.
Here's the premise. We invent a computer and give it all of our nuclear weapons. Only to discover the Russians have done it too. And so these two computers are existing, and we allow them to talk to each other. And they start solving problems we as humans can't solve.
Yeah.
And their directive is to keep us from destroying ourselves. But the way they do that is the whole point of the story.
Oh.
Anyway, I think you enjoy it.
Yeah, it sounds great.
In
Henry,
the last minutes, I'd like to get back to the story.
Sure.
Okay. One of the basic things here is with all this, with all that Val is studying, he still can't love. Now, is that a value? Is that some sort of human principle, or whatever you'd like to call it, that's going to be lost?
Wow. I don't know. That's a great question. It's open-ended.
It seems to be where this story is leading. Are we going to lose our ability to have any sort of human emotion?
I
with
will.
The most valuable one being love for each other.
I can tell you that the darker figure that Val became in this novel that will probably never see the light of day agrees with you, and actually sees this as the critical mistake of his life, and actually embraces a wholly different philosophy in a way. When you get to the end, you've realized in a certain way he's been a true believer all the way through, and he's just sort of traded out one philosophy for another. But he ends up becoming more of a kind of anarcho-primitivist. These are people who believe that actually technology, beginning with agriculture, 10,000 years ago, that actually was the beginning of all of our worst problems. We began our regime of control. We tried to control everything, and in retrospect, he sees oh, that's what I was doing. I was trying to be in control of everything, and in fact, it's not that way. And there's nothing he wants so much as love later in the book. So, yeah.
What about Maya, though? She walks away too. We didn't talk about that. Is it wisdom, or is she giving up, or what?
If I remember correctly, she really is the one who calls it, right?
She calls first that she loves him too, doesn't she? She says those words, and he says, "I love you too," or something like that.
You remember better than I do. That might be. I know they say Gimelin for a while. They
right. But then eventually, she says, and then I think that's what triggers him. He does say it back to her, but then she's the one that just has the wisdom to walk away.
Right.
You need a break.
I think she's very smart
for it, or try to talk him into anything. That's an interesting choice.
That's true. There is a line at one point about how she's so smart she can read the future sometimes, or whatever. It's future studies too. She's in a way, her instincts, her intuition are probably a better guide than all of his reading.
But
I find it interesting too that there's a lot of transition material in this that we haven't really spoken about. For instance, even their own humanity. You call them Hapas? Is that what? So
Hapa just means mixed race in Hawaii.
Right. So even in that, as
Mm.
humans, they're mixed.
Mhm.
And then he is also mixed because he has the implants. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of things in this that are showing a kind of transition to something
Mm.
else.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in this part. He also has a Korean mother. Is that clear here? That comes out? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both Hapa. I don't know. I think the reason I chose to make them both Hapa really is just because so many of my students are. It's so typical of Hawaii,
Yes, right.
the Hawaii population, and yet, he gets moved to New York. Well, New York's pretty international place, but I know that I have many students, for instance, Asian American students who never thought of themselves as Asian until they went to the US, into the mainland. And suddenly they went to college and realized, oh, I'm Asian. In Hawaii, they were just local, Um, but there is another thing there too. Writing about Hawaii as a white guy who's settled there is really vexed. It can be pretty uncomfortable. And so there's probably I didn't think about it a whole lot, but I know I've tried to write about Hawaii in various ways and very often feel like this is uncomfortable somehow. My great teacher, Ian McMillan, the best teacher I ever had. He was a great novelist in Hawaii. He was a white guy from New York, and he lived there for 30 years, writing novels, winning awards, great novelist. But he didn't write about Hawaii for 30 years. Finally, when he started, he didn't stop. He wrote an awful lot about Hawaii, but he had felt the same thing. There's just something a little, you just want to get it right. You kind of want to figure out your place there, and it's complicated.
It is complicated because there's also the language issue, which I think we spoke about at one time. And that is a lot of Hawaiian literature is written actually in Hawaiian, or the language, or some variety of it.
Yeah.
And it makes it difficult in that case to have the rest of us read it.
It's the question that never goes away when you're writing. Right now, I got asked to write a short story for an anthology that's coming out called Honolulu Noir. So I'm writing a noir short story set in 2041. And I'm asking myself that exact question. I mean, there are the way locals really talk, all the Hawaiian Creole or pidgin words that we really do use there. And so you have to ask yourself the audience question, right? Am I going to call it a puka? Am I going to call it a hole? Because no one in Hawaii who's been there any length of time is calling it a hole. But everybody in Nebraska is going to understand hole, and they're not going to understand puka. So yeah, it's, from one project to the next, you have to reevaluate that question. It is complicated. You'll see in that anthology that you held up, Snaring New Suns, we published a whole short story entirely in Hawaiian without translation.
I see it.
Yeah. So who's the audience for that story? Well, it's limited.
Yeah, that is you need a glossary.
A very, very big one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But is there anything in any kind of trends in Hawaiian literature that maybe we can relate to? Those of us who are American speakers?
I mean, most of what you're going to find in an anthology like that's a little bit, unfamiliar is Hawaiian Creole. So in the 19th century, lots of people came to Hawaii from around the world to work on the plantations, right? It was lots of Japanese, especially Portuguese, Filipinos, some Chinese, it's all these people who were working the farms together, and they had to communicate. So they, came up with this sort of pidgin. That's what a true pidgin is. What we call pidgin is not a pidgin, actually. I'll get to that in a second. They spoke just in a way that was good enough. It's kind of ad hoc, right? But their kids grew up listening to that and incorporating it with standard English. And what they created was a fully functioning language. I mean, there's nothing you can't express in the language that their kids developed. And that's a Creole. So it's really called Hawaiian Creole. We call it pidgin, but it's not a pidgin anymore. And it, it's I hear much less of it than I did even 17 years ago now, but there are some writers who write in Pidgin, and you know, it's very important to them that it be preserved. And Lee Tonouchi is one who's quite well known. And yeah, it's by definition a smaller audience, and there's no standard orthography. So every time you're asking yourself interesting questions about how you do this thing. So much of it is to do with cadence in Hawaii too. My great teacher, Ian, when he first arrived in Hawaii, he said what he remembered is he went for a drive and he asked somebody directions. And the person said, "Hey, you know where the tomato patch is?" And hey, do you know where the tomato patch is, right? But it wasn't the words so much. I mean, they're almost the same, but it was the inflection, the cadence that was so beautiful, melodic and beautiful to him. Hey, you know where the tomato patch is? And that's what he wanted to get into his writing. And so there's no one-to-one way to do that. It's musical interpretation, you know? Yeah.
Are there any other questions, comments from anyone?
I feel bad. I know I just haven't shut up much.
That's
No.
okay, Tom.
Yeah.
Yes, it's quite all right.
Yeah, we were here to listen, so thank
Yeah.
you very much. It was
Oh,
really
thanks for saying
great.
it. Oh, I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm not hard to reach. My last name at gmail.com. Reach out to me anytime and we can continue the conversation or have some other one. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, if you
Great.
come to Hawaii, look me up.
Oahu.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. This
Yeah,
is-
Yes,
thank
thank
Very
you.
much. It was
you,
wonderful.
Chuck. And
Very, very interesting session today.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
happy birthday, Sharyn.
thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. You had to get that in. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, is it bad news?
No, it's fine. It's
Okay.
fine. I'm glad I lived this long. So
Just
Keep it
think of
up.
the possibilities with transhumanism.
That's right.
that's right. That's
You won't-
right.
You only have to make it, 6 more months, and then you get an extra 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.